Hello, and welcome to Speaking Out on Financial Abuse. Stories of survival and hope after financial abuse in a marriage or romantic partnership. I'm your host, Lori G. And before I introduce today's guest, I want to give you a few statistics. In a 2014 survey conducted by Lifeway Research, a Christian organization, it was found that 29% of Protestant church pastors, meaning non-Catholic clergy, did not believe domestic violence was an issue amongst their own church members, and that was regardless of the church size. 40% of pastors polled stated that they rarely or never mentioned domestic violence during a sermon message, and 72% of pastors who have mentioned domestic violence in a sermon refer only to the outside unsaved community, never referring to their own members. But BaptistNews.com, also a Christian organization, released an article in 2022 titled, How the Church Becomes a Grooming Place for Domestic Violence. The article states domestic abusers have admitted that the church is the best place to find a gullible, timid, complacent wife. Abusers know all they have to do is fake an interest in spirituality, say the right things, and get involved at church. Young women are taught to value strong male leadership and to watch for men who are committed to God. Then, due to the encouragement of short engagements, these girls are married long before they realize it was all a ruse, only to be told it's too late and the marriage is forever. Survivors of abuse said their church's response to their abusive marriage encouraged them to stay, pray, and submit. And none of these survivors said that staying and praying ever cured their abusive marriage. These victims reported instead that their faith was used to groom them before marriage and used against them after marriage, compounded when victims were told the abuse was their fault or when they were told the abuse was simply God's will for their lives. Lifeway Research reported in 2017 the 5 common myths Christian churches believe about domestic violence. 1, it doesn't happen in Christian homes. 2, submission will solve the problem. 3, it's the woman's fault. 4, domestic abuse isn't as bad as domestic violence. Lifeway's example of this is a pastor dismissing a weeping woman with a statement. I don't see any bruises or broken bones. You don't have it that bad. Behaviors such as calling you names, shaming you in front of the children, criticizing what you wear, controlling finances, forcing sex often leads to more violent behaviors, but it is not considered as bad as domestic violence. Myth number 5. If an abuser is truly sorry and forgiven, the relationship should be reconciled. This, in fact, can often be the cause of why a victim returns to an abusive marriage 7 times before leaving for good. They've been either encouraged or shamed into staying by religious authorities they respect and are frankly afraid to cross. I got to sidetrack here and add from personal experience that some women within a religious group, can be at least as problematic as the men. They've either been like a self-righteous old crone since they were 13 years old, or you potentially becoming single feels like some kind of social threat to them. I've encountered church women, pastors' wives, who would never be supportive of any woman wanting to leave their marriage, doesn't matter the reason. So some women can be real dangerous to accept advice from if you're under any kind of an abuse in a relationship. This is my opinion. There are amazing religious organizations and leaders around the world who do great life-saving work providing safety, comfort, and resources for survivors of all kinds of domestic abuse. But clearly there are problems as well, as indicated by these poll numbers from working senior pastors who are, in my opinion, maybe in dire need of some education. If you are in a domestic abuse situation and not getting support, you need new and you need more resources. And to explain more about how to navigate as an abuse survivor spiritual issues that may be coming up as you are striving to recover from abuse, I'm really happy to have today as a guest, spiritual coach and religious trauma expert, Michaela Giordana Castro. Michaela is a licensed clinical social worker who has significant experience helping those struggling with emotional conflicts related to their spiritual beliefs, especially after trauma from a relationship of domestic violence. Michaela firmly believes that you are the expert of your story and that the answers are within you. Michaela, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So where in the world are you and where in the world are you from?
I am in the Houston area of Texas, and that's also where I'm from. I was born in Houston. I grew up on like the other side of Houston, but I've also spent a good part of my life in Sicily, Italy, where my dad is from. So I've kind of been a little bit all over the place, but always kind of settling back down in Houston.
So what got you involved in doing something really intriguing and original with coming up with these alternative methods for self-discovery for people who are trying to navigate their way through abuse and trauma and maybe have tried all the standard methods? They've gone to the religious institutions, they've gone to various family counselors. What made you decide to get in this game?
So, for me, I was raised very religious. My dad was a pastor in the time that we did live in Italy. And I always had a strong heart for helping others, to relieve the suffering of others. So for me, growing up Christian, I was very, very strong in my faith, and I wanted to be a missionary or a Christian counselor. But there came a time in my life where I deconstructed and I left the faith of Christianity, which is not something that I expected, but I knew I still wanted to help people. And so I learned about therapy, I learned about social work, and I decided to take the route of becoming a licensed clinical social worker. Because of my upbringing, I've never really jumped into one way of thinking. I've always been interested in other opinions. For those raised really, really religious, there is the thought that, it's only one way is what's true. On top of that, my dad also dabbled into a lot of conspiracy theories. He was very against the medical system. So then when I went to college and I became friends with people pursuing degrees in the medical field and learning the things that they were learning that they would teach me, I got a new perspective of different kinds of people, different ways of living, different ways of believing. I myself had gone through this huge worldview shift from super duper Christian to figuring out what in the world was actually true and, how was life going to go for me. So I've always been open-minded, since that time to hearing different things. So as I built my career in therapy and I saw what was helping people, what wasn't helping people, I have been very interested in both the holistic methods as well as the more, traditional medical and scientific methods. And so just kind of through exploring and working with, hundreds of clients over the years, one of my jobs that I had before I got my license to work as a therapist was a therapeutic case manager. So I wasn't their therapist, but I was providing therapeutic support. And because it was a different level of help, I was working with literally hundreds of clients over the course of just several years. So I got a lot of data in my work of what was helping people, what wasn't helping people. And I think all of that combined just kind of led me to where I'm at now and, using what I've seen to work best so far, always open and willing to learn and grow.
Well, who were your influences?
When I left Christianity, it was right before I went to college. And the college that I went to was a very strict conservative Christian college. So in many ways, I was still in a very similar environment as I was growing up, homeschooled and Christian, pastor's daughter, all those things. So honestly, for me, a big influence was the internet. Just kind of, I would read articles all the time. Strangely enough, actually, by going to college, I met some people with different views, whereas growing up, just going to church and homeschool events and all of that, everyone pretty much had the same views. So I would see some of the content that was shared by these people who thought differently, and I would read it and I would consider it because I was trying to figure out what I understood to be true and good. I didn't reject what I learned in my childhood, but I also didn't hold on to it very tightly because that wasn't my faith anymore. I held on to what continued to work for me, and I explored other opinions and other sources of information. So it was really just a mix of all kinds of articles over the years. I had a really good professor in the social work department who was of influence to me. And really, between what I was honestly learning online and learning in school, mental health became a reality to me. Whereas before going to college, I had no idea that I suffered anxiety. And looking back, I was a textbook anxious child, but no one had ever used that word. It was always, you're so stressed. You need to stress less. You're just a stressful child. Then as I got older and, in regards to where I am in my spirituality now, that has been influenced by reading books like The Autobiography of a Yogi, which Steve Jobs really, really pushed people to read, which I thought that's what kind of interested me. Like Steve Jobs, this really, professional guy is pushing for this book. Another one I've really liked is called The Seed of the Soul. But as far as the therapeutic techniques, what's been really influential to me has been the internal family systems modality, which interestingly enough has also been a piece of my reconnection to spirituality. But for many years, for 10 years actually, after leaving my faith, I was not spiritual. I was very turned off to spirituality. I was fearful of it. And so really just the influence was just living life, learning from my professors, learning from my friends, learning from different types of people, both online and in person. What doesn't work, what absolutely doesn't work is staying silent. And this includes, and again, as a now spiritual person, again, for a time I wasn't, but I think staying silent includes speaking to whomever or whatever you perceive as God or higher power. I think it's important to not be silent, even when it comes to, our fellow humans, having someone that you can talk to, someone safe that you can talk to. Even being open with yourself is also very important through journaling, through self-reflection. But yes, staying silent does not work. Another huge, huge thing that does not work that we struggle with so much in our culture is shame, shaming ourselves, beating ourselves up, telling ourselves, I can't believe I let that happen, or I'm so stupid, or why can't I get over this? That totally does not help. And that's unfortunately something that happens even unintentionally a lot within a lot of religious cultures. Even though there is this mentality that we don't want to judge, we need to choose love. When there's such a strict view of what's right and what's wrong, shame just trickles through, judgment just trickles through. But those are some things that really stick out to me, is being silent and shaming others or shaming ourselves. Shame is absolutely shame, and staying silent is how we stay stuck 100%.
Well, in recovering from trauma takes a village. And I've heard this from others. It takes a village. But if the entire village that is advising you is all in one brick and mortar building with all one single mindset, that's not a village.
True.
Those are clones. That's not a village. In order to take a village, to help someone recover from or navigating spirituality during abuse and also during the trauma of the aftermath of abuse, what is the village that somebody needs?
Having a therapist or sometimes even a coach who is able and willing to create a safe space to not judge, to not shame, to welcome everything. That, of course, is very important. Also very important is someone who is educated. It is absolutely wonderful and valuable to have friends who are able to create a safe space. But at the same time, there may be things that these friends don't know about in regards to maybe what's harmful or what's most helpful given the situation. So if and when possible to work with an expert or specialist, that's really great, but it's key that they also don't bring in that shame or judgment. And unfortunately, that's something that some people experience seeking religious therapists and counselors. It just depends though. Some are able to, separate that from their professional life, but especially if it's like within the church, seeing a free Christian counselor, if they're able to embrace and support you, great. But like you said, if people are very restricted by one way of thinking, that's not getting a diverse range of support. And that diverse range that's important is feeling connected, feeling supported, not being judged or shamed. I think another important thing that is absolutely actually vital as part of growing and changing is not only others, which as we've already discussed is very important, but also our relationship with ourselves. This is so, so important. How we talk to ourselves, as mentioned earlier, if we're shaming ourselves, and also what we think of ourselves. If we value the opinion of other people, like let's say, there is a woman in an abusive relationship. She values what her husband thinks of her above what she thinks of her, or what her friends think of her above what she thinks of her. It's going to be so much harder to take steps that will lead her to have a happy and healthy life, which everyone deserves. No one deserves to live in abuse.
How do you think, or what do you think religious institutions do the most dangerously wrong with domestic violence victims? And how can somebody who's in a religious institution, how can they expect a better outcome?
Many religious institutions, and I know this from my experience, although, like I said, I was raised Christian, there was a time where we also attended synagogues. We were very interested in living life the way God would want us to. So eventually that led us to believing that the way of Messianic Judaism was best. So I know that's, different, but in my experience of quite some variety of religious institutions is that the damage that is done is when the institution is not willing to support the victim or the survivor. If the institution is prioritizing this concept of marriage over the health and well-being of a human being, that creates so much damage because, and I've seen this, women who are being abused, going to their institution, their religious institution, seeking support, seeking help, and they're told to have more sex with their husbands or to push through because God's testing you, or even to simply be told to kind of ride it out while they work with the husband. Well, if the abuse is continuing to occur, that's not okay. So the greatest damage that I see is when often an abused woman's experience is minimized. It is something that isn't taken seriously, and the woman is not protected because, again, this value can sometimes be on the marriage itself and that union over the safety of the woman.
Would you recommend somebody who is under abuse, has gone to their leadership, or maybe they're afraid and they don't want to go to their leadership, make that decision? Or how do you actually make that decision? Okay, I'm going to covertly go look for help. I'm not going to tell my current spouse because I'm under abuse, and I'm not going to talk to the church. It's a very hard decision to make.
It's a hard decision to make. And, I think it's very important that across the board, no matter what kind of type of person or group of people we're talking about, that we acknowledge that, I believe this very strongly, there's good and bad in everything, good and bad in everyone. And so if you have friends in the church who really have your back, who validate you, who support you, it's a great source of support. Again, we want to be open. But if we find that those friends are shaming, or they're not taking seriously the abuse that you're experiencing, it is a hard decision to make, but I do encourage seeking outside support. Now, there are barriers to this as well. Sometimes there are financial barriers in seeing a coach or a therapist. But we live in a very unique time where it's so easy to access information. Mm-hmm. So there are ways that you can get that external validation. It might not be a personal one-on-one interaction, but you can get that confirmation from experts, from leaders, from specialists that will tell you you're not crazy. If this and this is happening or that is happening, that's not okay. That's not healthy. That's not right. You don't deserve that. And even find resources such as your podcast that can help direct with, this is what you can do instead. So it can be hard when, our circle is, let's say, limited by an institution, but that doesn't mean there might not be some good resources there.
Sure.
So absolutely, if we have that gut feeling that they're not going to support, or especially if that's what we are seeing, we do open up and they're not supporting, seeking outside help. Again, a therapist, if you can find one, afford one with your insurance, or even self-pay, if you have the means to pay for a therapist or a coach, investing in ourselves is one of the best ways we can spend our money. If that's not possible, though, we can get books at the library. We can watch videos on YouTube. There's a lot out there. We can look at different websites that have information.
There are dynamite churches and dynamite pastors out there who take this issue very, very seriously. And as soon as someone came up with domestic violence, they would just be all over it.
I support people if they are happy and doing good and not hurting others within, any kind of specific religion. Great, no problem. But we are seeing internationally so many people deconstructing and leaving religion. And something I experienced was 10 years of feeling lost, feeling very put off by spirituality in general, a fear of, feeling hurt by feeling tricked and wronged by it. So I'm building this business specifically to coach and support people navigating spirituality post-Christianity. And I'm building a course to support people in that. And I'm also, again, building my YouTube channel. I've got content on TikTok and Instagram, seeking to provide free information for things people can do to kind of help themselves on the mental health side of things after your whole world view comes crumbling down. That's very traumatic, as well as, finding some of those positives from religion, such as peace and love and the things that sometimes some people struggle with if they just kind of let go of spirituality altogether. Not everyone. And, in my 10 years of not being spiritual, I was quick to say that I don't need spirituality. Spirituality is not a necessity. And I still believe that, but I do think it can enrich our lives even more. And it doesn't have to bring all the baggage that a lot of religions bring.
Are you going to do these courses online and have signups for people worldwide?
Yeah.
Oh,
absolutely.
We're a good place to connect with you for that. I would love to. I would love to, when you offer your courses, let us know, and definitely we'll promote it and connect with it, because everyone is unique. As you say, they each have their own individual stories. Everybody needs their own village, and every village is going to be as individual as a snowflake on how they are able to get through the life's traumas and also, like you said, large worldview changes. Mm-hmm. So I ask everyone this: what is your tip right now for somebody who's listening, who is right now under financial abuse? Someone who's in it.
Real quick. One other thing as part of that village that you mentioned is, in pursuits of helping create more of a village of those who get this, I've also created a Facebook group called Unbound Faith, Post-Christianity Spirituality. And that's one attempt to help bring more people together who are on this journey. Yeah, to answer the question about, my tip for someone listening who is under financial abuse. So my advice for someone in a religious institution who is experiencing domestic violence, my advice would be to think about yourself as a child. Think about when you were a little girl and think about how it would feel to be standing next to that little girl and allowing her to be treated in the way that you're being treated. This is not to shame yourself that this is happening. This is to build energy of that, to use kind of more of a religious term, righteous anger over what's happening, to give you that energy to take action. I would ask yourself, what do I want for this little girl? How do I want her to be treated? And if you know that doesn't mean staying in the situation you're in, that something needs to change, I would encourage some regulation. So regulation can be done through deep breathing exercises, meditation, and it's something I really advocate for, but meditation can be tough when we're in the thick of trauma. It can sometimes be like a stage for all the negative thoughts to get the microphone. So I really encourage breathing exercises. This is something that regulates our nervous system, wakes up our conscious, rational adult brain, the prefrontal cortex. And after doing that regulation, I would look within and ask myself, or encourage her to ask herself, who are my safe people? And to be brave and talk to that safe person about what you're experiencing. If that person is validating and supportive, maybe work with them on a plan, do the research together about what resources are in your area or what next steps might be possible for you. If that person's not supportive, maybe they're shaming, or if you don't have a safe person to turn to, that's when I would encourage you to prioritize that little girl. Because even though you're not a little girl, you're an adult, you're a woman, that little girl still lives within you. There's a lot of both spiritual perspectives, but also scientific perspectives that advocate for this way of thinking about we all have an inner child. And I can, get into the science if you're interested, but I would think about that and prioritize her. So do the things you need to do to take better care of yourself, even if it's just slight changes. If you're struggling with a lot of depression or a lot of being under a lot of control, it's okay if you can't suddenly have this amazing routine and amazing self-care practice, but do any little shift that you can and celebrate it. And again, get that outside support if you can. And if you can't, find it for yourself, because as where there's a will, there's a way, especially now with the internet. And even if you can't afford internet, you can go to the library. There are all kinds of different things we can do, and find those resources that fuel you, that affirm you, that charge you up, so that you can take the steps necessary, so you can look at that little girl of your past self and say, I feel good about how I'm taking care of her. I feel good about the life that I'm living. That would be my advice.
That's such good stuff. And what is your tip for someone listening right now who is a survivor of financial abuse and domestic violence, who's already lost everything and is now starting over?
My advice for someone who has already lost everything and is starting over, the first thing that comes to mind is to celebrate yourself. You've done something incredibly difficult that many people, unfortunately, tragically, weren't able to do. Most statistics show that to get to that point, it doesn't just take a moment of bravery. It takes, on average, 7 tries to finally leave an abusive partnership. So I know so much is painful and scary and distressing right now, and I'm going to get to that. But in the midst of that, Recognize how brave you are, how powerful you are, how much you have done for yourself, and how important that is, how valuable that is. I do also encourage to hold space for that pain, for that stress and despair, not to give it like the microphone, so to speak, to make you feel more pain and fear. But there's something called feel to heal. We don't want to run away from our emotions. We need to feel those feelings so that the body can process it and then in turn release it. That way, the body is able to move on. Because if we just suppress that anger, that fear, that sadness, it's going to come out in different ways. Research shows now that suppressed emotion is a huge contributor to even chronic illness, something that we used to not think had anything to do with emotions at all. That was just genetics. But it's important to process our feelings. So yes, I'm encouraging to recognize how amazing and powerful you are, but also give yourself time to feel your feelings. This is very different than thinking. If you think about, oh, I let this happen, I let that happen, and, running through the memories of your trauma, that's not good for us. Or to assume what's going to happen in the future. I'm going to have a terrible life now. This is going to be so hard. This is going to take so long. That's not helpful either. We don't know the future. What I really encourage is staying present. And if in the present you're feeling distressing feelings, letting that be there. Paying attention to the sensation in your body. Maybe you feel like a knot in your stomach. Pay attention to that knot. Let it be there. Allow it. It's not going to last forever.
Michaela, I'm so grateful to have had you on the show today. We have talked back and forth a little bit here and there before today's taping. And again, this is Michaela Giordano Castro. You can find Michaela on Facebook on her page, Unbound Faith. She also has a YouTube channel under her name, Michaela Giordano Castro. Thanks again, Michaela.
Thank you so much, Lori. It's been such a pleasure being here. And on all of my social medias and my YouTube, you can find me under Michaela's Mind Munchies.